queries and query-based collections. So in our last nugget, we spent some time talking about the basics and also some of the advanced topics associated with inventory. And then we talked about really kind of the very basic sorts of collections that you might create inside of your configuration manager infrastructure. Now, it's important to start there because creating collections is as much an art as it is a science. And so really understanding how to best create collections will go very, very far in ensuring that you do the best thing you can, the best possible practices that you can to deploy packages and to deploy software updates to very targeted units. Now let's think about this for just a minute because you're going to have a set of machines in your environment. Some machines may be of certain configurations, some may be of other configurations. Some are laptops, some are desktop. Some have certain applications on them, some have other applications. And it's your job as a configuration manager administrator to make sure that all of those machines have the right baseline, have the right applications and the right configuration on them so that their users can do the job that they need to. And what Configuration Manager provides for you is a way to very specifically target those machines so that you can update them easily, automatically, but also very precisely at the same time. What you'll find is that those static collections that we created in the last nugget will help in some circumstances because you're essentially directly adding computers into those collections. But over time, your environment is going to change. Over time, you want to be able to plan for this dynamicism in the environment, and you want those collections to be able to change as the environments change. And you'll find that we actually can get this through what we call query-based collection. And really, this is one of the most powerful components of Configuration Manager because it really allows, without any additional work on your part, the collections to change as the environments change. In this nugget, we're going to talk about viewing queries, and we're going to talk about also creating queries as well. You'll find that there actually is something we call the SMS provider language, which is kind of like SQL query language. If you're familiar and comfortable with creating SQL queries, you're going to be very, very good at doing these SMS queries. They're relatively similar, and we'll talk about the differences between the two, and we'll even show you the SMS database, or excuse me, the SQL query database, so you can take a look at the views and the tables inside of the SQL and see what kind of data is being populated there. And then in addition to creating some queries, we'll talk about some best practices in actually creating them so it makes it easy for you to deploy software and do all the things you need to do with Configuration Manager. So I want to start actually by taking a look at some of the queries inside of the Configuration Manager interface. And you'll see here we've been talking about collections quite a bit, and collections and queries link to each other in a lot of different ways. Down here under the Queries node, if we expand it, we'll see a number of the default queries that are created as part of the installation of Configuration Manager. You'll see here all of these configurations or all these queries that have been created relate to the default collections that have already been created as well. Let's take a look at one of these, for example. Let's take a look at the All Systems query here. You'll notice if I click on it, I get a little bit of additional information different than what I would get as part of the collection. And that's because the collection is really only interested in showing me which machines, which computers actually relate to what I'm trying to query. Whereas the query allows me to put more information in there. Now you'll see there are a couple of machines in here, sccm Nugget and Nugget 1, the two computers that we currently have clients attached to. And we can see, well, okay, they're assigned site code. There's their IP address. There's their IP subnet. Here's their resource domain, which is Nugget Lab. All of this is being populated because we've configured the query to actually show us those elements. If I choose the properties of a query, you'll see a new screen that pops up that shows me the name of the query and any comments associated with that query. And then also we can either import a query statement or we can edit that existing query statement. Because again, we're trying to pull systems, we're trying to pull computers, you'll see that our object type is related to the system resource in this case. I'm going to show you what the query is that we're actually using to pull all systems. Here are the results. Here are the items that we want to show in the screen that we're seeing over here on the right based on the results of this query. Again, name and SMS assigned sites and IP address and subnets, etc. The criteria, the actual criteria that are explaining what it is we want to show are here in the second tab. And now you'll notice that we don't have any criteria because all we're saying is show me everything. This is all systems. So I don't have any criteria in here. And once I create criteria, you'll find that this will fill up with very specific criteria that limits what it is each query is trying to pull. In addition to joins, any sorts of joins that are related between tables in the database or views in the database will be shown in here inside of the Joins tab. You'll see here we have the system resource because we're pulling from a single table, a single view inside of our SQL database. There are no joins, and we have a single attribute that we're actually, or a single table that we're actually doing a join against. Let's get cancel here, and let's get a little more complicated in the queries that we have available. This one started out with all systems, but maybe we're interested in seeing all systems that are at Windows 2000 Professional. So let me go ahead and click here, and we click the properties again, and we see edit query statement, and we'll see we're pulling the same sort of data that we were before: SMS assigned sites and IP addresses and IP subnets. So the information I'm showing here will be similar for those systems that result from the query, but my criteria is going to be subtly different. You'll see here that the criteria for this is system system operating system name and version is like Workstation 5.0. And we know this because we've actually gone through and seen what are the possibilities for creating this query. If I choose this item right here, if I click this link here, I can actually edit the query, change the properties of the query to maybe make it a little bit different. Maybe I want to change it from 5.0 to 5.1 to change the version that I'm interested in, or 6.0. Or maybe instead of being is like Workstation 5.0, I want to make it is equal to, or is greater than, or is less than that particular number. And so you'll see here that there's some powerful logic operations that we want to do in order to create queries that are very specifically targeted into the systems that we're looking for. In addition to being able to change operators, we can also change the type of criteria. Not only simple values, but maybe a prompted value, or a list of values, or a list of sub-selected values. The power here is in being able to very specifically define what exactly you're trying to pull off of this. Now, using these predefined ones, we really don't want to modify the existing native ones, the ones that come natively with the installation. What we want to do really is create our own queries and use the art of creating queries to very specifically target what we're looking for. Now let me show you back up here under collections again. We've had a number of systems in our all systems collection, but only 2 of those systems actually have clients attached to them. These other systems they have discovery records in our database, but we're not pulling any inventory from them because they don't have clients assigned. And so let's say for our first example today, what we want to do is we want to create a query that very specifically gives us just the systems that have clients installed on them. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to call out all of the machines that do not have clients installed. Let's talk about how we'll do that. I'm going to start by scrolling back down into queries again, and I'm going to click on queries and right click to create a new query. And so what we're going to create here is a query that just shows us those clients that have, or those systems that have the client installed. So we'll say systems with client installed. Okay? And what we're going to do is choose the system resource here. We'll leave the comment blank for now, but we'll choose the system resource here, and we want to edit this query statement. I'm going to click the Edit Query Statement button, and it brings up the Query Statement Properties window. I'm going to skip past General for just a second because what I want to look at are the criteria for the query that I want to create. In this case, I'm going to create criteria. I'm looking for a simple value, and I'm going to click the Select button here to choose what sort of attribute that I want to query on. Let's see, in this case, the attribute we may want to query on is, let's say SMS Advanced Client State. You notice here as I scrolled through, there are all kinds of attributes that we're pulling information from in our systems right now. You know, SMS Advanced Client State, software files, software products, software updates. Really, there's all kinds of data that we could potentially base this query on. Network adapter, NAP client, for example. What I'm looking for in this particular query that I'm creating is, again, I want to find out whether or not the client, the discovered client, has an SMS client installed to it. And so I want to look for the state. I want to look for the attribute. In this case, I'm going to look for version. And I'm going to say, okay, give me all of the clients where the version number is greater than 0. Now, in this case, if the client doesn't have a version involved, if this client doesn't have an actual configuration manager client installed to it, then it's not going to have a version number. But if it does have a version or client installed to it, it's going to have a version number probably at 4 dot something or other, because this is SMS v4. And so what I'm saying here is give me the value of all those clients that have their advanced client state version greater than 0. You'll see here if I click the value button here, the option that's available to me in my database is really 4.0.5931.40 here. So I know that I've got some entries in here that are equal to this. Clicking this values button gives me the list of sample values that are potentially available in my database today. So I'm going to click OK here, and you'll see here now that we've created a criteria. SMS advanced client state dot version is greater than 0. And you'll see we have a join here between the system resource and also the advanced client state resource here. This is an inner join. If you're familiar with SQL query language, this is an inner join. And then I go over here to the General tab, and I can begin to select what attributes I'm interested in pulling out of the results for this. And so the attribute class under system resource, I want to find out, for example, the name. I want to find out the name of that system. What computer names are going to respond to my query? And so I'm not interested in sorting information here. And I now have the names of the computers. If I click OK, I'm going to not limit this collection based off of the presence or absence of another collection. I'm going to say for the entire infrastructure I want to base this query on, I want to click Next. I'm not interested in security at this point, and click Finish. We've now created our first query inside of Configuration Manager, and you'll see here systems with client installed. And now if I scroll over, you'll see sccm nugget and nugget1, and they're in here a number of times. Now that's interesting. Why would we have those in here a number of times? Well, what you're finding now has to do with the relation of how Configuration Manager is pulling information out of the database. Let's go ahead and take a look at why this may be the case. So I'm going to go back to our query statement here and click Edit Query Statement. And then we're going to go look back at the information that we're pulling out from those responses. What I want to find out now is not only from the system resource, but I also want to find out from that other resource that we were looking at before, SMS Advanced Client State. And we want to say what the name of it is here, because this is going to provide us more information about what data is being pulled and why we're seeing these duplicates. If I click the OK button and OK again and refresh the query, go down here, Systems with Site Installed, you'll see now that in our resulting list, we have for each server in there, we have each of the different clients that is currently installed to those servers. If we looked at the client itself, if we looked at the components that were installed to those clients, they would relate to each one of these elements inside of our response. So we really have two computers here, and each computer has multiple clients. But really what I want is I want a query that just shows me the computers that have the client installed. I'm not interested in all this data. Let me go back and change this query one more time. I'm going to choose Properties and edit the query statement again. And I'm going to remove the SMS Advanced Client State name information. That's not something I'm interested in, so I can click the X here to remove it. And what I want to do now is I want to omit any duplicate rows. In this case, if I'm seeing duplicate rows, I'm just going to omit them all so I only have the ones that are of interest. I click OK a final time and then refresh the query. And when I scroll down here and look at Systems with Client Installed, you see I now have Nugget1 and sccm Nugget. Those are the two computers, as we learned before, that have the client installed on them. So this is really creating our first query. This is how we can really drill down to just those systems that we want. Now that we know how to create a query, let's do the same thing not only here inside of queries, but let's do the same thing up here inside of our collections. The reason we want to do this is because queries are used for reporting information and for just learning more information about what the systems are doing. But for us to be able to deploy software and deploy updates and really make changes onto those systems, our queries have to be wrapped into a collection. Let's go ahead and create a collection now. Really what we're going to do is very similar to what we did before down in the Queries node. We're going to right-click and create a new collection, and we're going to call it Systems with Client Installed. I'm going to click the Next button here, and we're going to say Membership Rules. Do we want to have membership rules? In this case, not a direct membership, so we won't be clicking the left button, but we'll be clicking the middle left button here with the little cylinder. What this does is says brings forward the query rule, and so we can create a query rule. Systems with Client Installed. Installed query. I'm not going to limit it by collection, but I am going to edit the query statement to do just the same thing that we did before. I'm going to click Criteria here. I'm going to choose a simple value, and then scroll down to the SMS location that we were looking at before, SMS Advanced Client State, and the attribute's name is version. The version will be greater than 0. As before, if I click the value here, you'll see what possible values are available to me. In this case, 4.0 is greater than 0, so I'm okay with that. But I want to choose those values that are greater than 0. If I click OK, you'll see now, just like before, we've added this criteria into our criterias list, and the join is also available there. What you'll also notice is that the general tab is grayed out at this point. The general tab is grayed out because we are not going to be pulling lots of different information into a collection. We're only interested in which computers correspond to the query that we just created. If we click OK here, we now have a correctly created query to do exactly what we did before. You'll see here that we now have a membership rule associated with this collection. Just like before in the last nugget, we could update this collection on a schedule, which is something we want to do, which will happen every day. If we click next, we're not interested in advertising anything to it. We're not really interested in security at this point. And so we see the collection is created. I'm going to go down here, and you'll notice now that I have a collection. We have a collection that says sccm nugget and nugget 1. Now, as we'll learn when we talk about software distribution in a later nugget, we can use this collection to very specifically define who we want to deploy software to. If we go back to our all systems collection, if you remember that those systems that don't have clients installed onto them, we can't really deploy software to them. And so trying to deploy to the all systems collection may not be a good idea because it's going to give us bad statistics. We may have both of these systems correspond and actually successfully install the software, but we may end up with a very low percentage completion rate when we look at our reports because there's all these other systems in there that make no sense to us because they don't have clients onto them. So we want to instead maybe deploy software to this other collection that we've created that makes it a little bit more correct when we're looking at our reports. Now let's actually take what we learned here and do another collection based on a query that may be a little more used to you. Let's talk about a use case that you may be using probably quite often in your environment, and that may be seeing which computers have Microsoft Word installed onto them. You know, we want to know what version of Word is installed because maybe we want to upgrade Word, or maybe we want to know which computers have Word in our environment. Maybe we want to know so that we can make sure that our licensing is correct and that our licensing is done at the correct level and we have the right number of licenses purchased. So let's actually create this collection so we can see which computers in our environment have Word installed. I want to create this as a sub-collection to the collection I've already created. I'm going to right-click here on Systems with Client Installed, and I'm going to say New Collection. And what I'm creating now is not only a collection, but a sub-collection based on the information that is in the collection above it. In this case, we're going to say Client Systems with Word Installed. We click Next, and we're going to create a membership rule at this point. Again, we're going to create a query-based membership rule. Systems with Word Installed Query. You can type whatever you want in here for the name for your query. I just tend to make them the same as the collection, but you can make it however you want. In our case, though, we're going to limit our responses to the collection that is above the one that we've just created. Here's Systems with Client Installed. And so we've already narrowed down the number of clients by virtue of this query, and we want to narrow even further to say which systems have Word installed that also have the client installed. We click OK. We're going to click Edit Query Statement here. And we're going to create another query here under the criteria node by saying, okay, we want to know, based off of the software composition of the clients, we're going to look at software files. This file or this attribute will give us the name and the version number and the path for all of the files that are on all of our systems. And the attribute that is of interest to us is file name. We click OK. And we want to know where software file's file name is equal to winword.exe. Now I'll show you if I click the value button here, these are all of the possible solutions that we could have. And look at all of those DLL and exe files that we have collected so far off of the two systems that have clients inside of our environment. And so there's all kinds of different options for us if we want to go search through those values. But what we know is that winword.exe is the name of the file that we're looking for to see if it's on the systems that we've collected from. I click OK. And now we have a criteria that says software file's file name is equal to winword.exe. I want to show you something that I didn't show you before. That's down here, this little button that says Show Query Language. A while ago, we talked about the difference between SMS query language and SQL query language. And if you're familiar with SQL query language, you know the select star from whatever table you want to select from, and then you do inner joins, and you reference the two, and you create the linkages. But inside of Configuration Manager, if you don't like using the interface, you can always also type in the information manually at the command line. Maybe it's not winword.exe we're interested in. Maybe it's excel.exe or something like that. You can always make those changes directly through the query language if you find that to be more comfortable for you. In our case, we're looking for winword.exe. So we're going to leave this the same way it was before. We click OK. We click OK again. And we finish the wizard. Now, sub to our collection, we have systems with client installed with these two hosts. And now we see client systems with Word installed. In this environment, I have only installed Word to Nugget 1. Nugget 1 is our XP machine. So the response that we get is that sccm Nugget does not have Word installed because the winword.exe application, the executable file itself, is not present on the system. So we can be comfortable with pushing an update to Word specifically to this collection and know that every one of the hosts in that collection has Word installed. What we're talking about is one of the things we wanted to talk about in this Nugget had to do with best practices. And one of the best practices with creating collections is making sure that you target those collections very specifically to the machines that you want to install the software to, or the machines that you want to install the updates to. Obviously, if we have an update, we don't want to push a Word update to a machine that doesn't have Word on it. It might crash the system. It might cause an error message to appear. It might irritate the user. And so we don't want to do that. We can get even more complex if we wanted with our collections as well. Let's say instead of looking at just Word, but we want to see if Word 2007 is installed on these machines. Let's take a look and see which client systems may have Word 2007. I know that because I've done some research associated with the Word executable file, that when the Word executable file is of a version that is greater than 12, if you think about it when you look at Microsoft Office, Word 2007 or Office 2007 is technically Office version 12. I know that the Word exe file, winword.exe, if it is of a version greater than 12.0, that I know that that is a Word 2007 installation. So let's go ahead and modify our existing collection that we've created here and make it just a little bit more useful for what we're looking for. Let's right-click and choose Properties, and we want to say with Word 2007 installed as opposed to just Word. We want to click on Membership Rules here. We want to change our query just a little bit to make it a little bit more targeted into what exactly we're looking to find. Okay, here's our query, and we're going to change it to Systems with Word 2007 installed. We want to click the Edit Query statement here. What we're going to do is add an additional criteria to our collection to make sure it focuses specifically on Word, not only winword.exe, but winword.exe at version 12. So I'm going to create another criteria here by clicking the button, and I want to say simple value, and the value name I'm interested in is software files again, software files. And there's software files, and in this case I'm looking for file version. There's file version. You'll notice that for any software file on this system, I can do version or size or even the path of the file or the modified date. There's a lot of different attributes that I can pull for a particular software file. And just between you and me, you'll find yourself in software files a lot because you'll be basing a lot of collections off of software files. In this case, file version is something I'm interested in, so I hit OK. And what I'm looking for is the case when file version is greater than 12.0. If I look at the value here, you'll see there's all kinds of different values. These are the values for all of the different versions of any file that is on any system inside of my environment. So there's lots and lots of different values here. You can see how clicking the values button in some cases doesn't provide a lot of information that is really terribly useful to you. So what I'm looking for here is where it is greater than 12.0. We click OK. And you'll see here now that we have two criterias, winword.exe and greater than 12.0. If I wanted, I can switch that from an and to an or by clicking this button. This button changes so it says, well, give me anything that either has a software value of 12.0 of any file or is winword.exe. That's not terribly useful to me, so I'm going to keep it as an and. And you'll see again down here under the query language that my query language has gotten a little bit more complicated because we've done an additional join into our query. Click over here on the joins, you'll see now that we're doing additional joining here to make sure, excuse me, not additional join, we're doing additional data that we're pulling out of the existing join. So we go back to general here, and we click OK, and we click OK again, and we click OK again. If we refresh this query, we'll see that Nugget 1 actually has winword.exe at version 12 point something. so that we know now that we can target not only a Word update, but a Word 2007 update to this client because we know that its version of WinWord.exe is at 12 point something. So this is a good example for you of how you may end up creating the collections in your environment. And you'll find that with all the different functions and all the different capabilities out there for creating collections, that your collections get very, very specifically targeted. And again, like we talked about the art of Configuration Manager, there's a lot of art in making sure that you tailor those collections as specifically as possible. Now, the one thing you may be asking is, well, okay, Greg, you've showed me all this data, but where do you get all this stuff? How do you know what this information is? And is there an easy way for me to pull this information out, maybe in a little more graphical way? Well, I brought up SQL Server Manager here. Here's the SQL Server Management Studio. And this is actually directly attaching into this Configuration Manager database, sccm, that we created whenever we first installed Configuration Manager onto our system. And you'll see here, if we look at the tables, here's a whole list of the tables of all the data that we're pulling from those tables. These are the actual tables themselves that are being populated when our clients go inventory themselves, interrogate themselves for all their settings, and push all this information back to Configuration Manager. If we look for, say, software files, which is the SMS information we were looking back before when we were creating the query, maybe we'll find information directly in the database. Let's see. Here's dbo.softwarefile, which is the table, the actual table in the database where this information is stored. If we right-click and choose Open Table, over here on the right, we'll actually see more information about that information that we've pulled into our SMS database. Let's see here. File ID 1 is this file name right here, and ID 2 is this file name right here. Here's a description. Here's the file version for that file. Maybe there's the file size for that file. If we look down, we may eventually at some point find WinWord.exe somewhere inside of this table. But you can see here that this is the actual information that we're pulling out of this table. Another way that we can look for things is actually to look at a view. If we go ahead and close this table and bring open a view, we can actually look at VGS software file, which is the actual software file location where that information is stored at, and take a look at the view for the software file. Again, more information directly out of the database for what it is we're trying to pull. Now, the reason I show you this is because, yeah, there can be some challenges, and if you do the wrong things directly in SQL Server, you could really screw some things up. But looking at the data directly inside of the database is sometimes helpful when you're creating those collections, when you're creating those queries, to make sure you kind of a sanity check that you're pulling against the right data. And so if you're uncomfortable with SQL Server, see if you can familiarize yourself with enough with SQL Server, because knowing SQL Server and knowing the queries that you need to create with SQL Server will assist you with the process of creating those queries and collections inside of SMS and inside of Configuration Manager. You'll find that the two are very, very similar, and that the language that you use to create the queries between the two is relatively similar as well. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked about viewing queries, and we talked about the difference between the two different types of languages, SQL query language and SMS provider language. We drilled straight down into that SQL database to show you the actual data in the actual tables of SQL, so you can get a look for, well, what kind of data are we pulling? What are the options available to me to create collections against? We then went ahead and created a query, and we created a query-based collection, so we can have, as our environment changes, the collection will update on an everyday basis to always give us a view of which systems have, for example, the client installed, and which systems have Word 2007 installed. And then we talked a little bit about some of those best practices with collection creation. It's always better to create query-based collections because they will automatically update themselves on a regular period. And so as your environment changes, so will your collections. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.